Hello, and welcome to today's training, Mindfulness Over Matter, Integrating Mindfulness into the Treatment of Depression with Dr. Jill Emanuel, PhD. This professional webinar is a partnership with the Child Mind Institute in New York. I am Helen Heyman, Director of Programs at ADAA. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Telephone in the audio panel and the dial-in information will be displayed. We will first kindly ask you to mute yourself so that we don't hear any background noise. To mute yourself, you will need to press the gray tab just below the red arrow in the control panel. Kindly also switch off your webcam. The webcam tab is just below the mute tab and should be of gray color. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the chat panel of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. You will also be able to access materials. If you registered and paid for continuing education credit, you will first need to provide the 4-letter CE code on the professional webinar evaluation form. The link to the evaluation form in SurveyMonkey will be sent to you 48 hours after the end of this professional webinar. You can either answer the assessment questions at the end of this webinar by staying online. At the end of the talk, a screen will come up with the assessment questions. You will have 10 minutes to answer these questions. Once you answered them, please click Submit. You can also answer them 48 hours later in the test assessment question that will be sent to you. I would like to now introduce our expert. Dr. Jill Emanuel, PhD, is the Senior Director of the Mood Disorders Center and the Director of the Dialectical Behavior Therapy Program at the Child Mind Institute. She has a breadth of experience in the evaluation and treatment of children and adolescents with mood disorders, with a special focus on complex presentations. Dr. Emanuel has expertise in CBT, family therapy, and mindfulness training. She also has experience with diverse populations of children, adolescents, and their families. Dr. Emanuel is intensely trained in DBT with over 15 years of experience in providing individual and group DBT to adolescents and their families while supervising and teaching students and clinicians in providing dialectical behavioral therapy services. In addition, she has presented at academic medical centers, public schools, community health centers, and professional conferences on the topics of mindfulness, adolescent depression and suicide, adolescent self-injury, DBT, and adolescent borderline personality disorder. Dr. Emanuel has also co-authored book chapters on some of these important topics. Finally, Dr. Emanuel is dedicated to increasing public education and disseminating empirically supported treatments for mood and anxiety disorders and mindfulness-based interventions. She is devoted to providing children and adolescents exceptional treatment that builds a strong foundation for growth, self-discovery, and success in every individual. It is a true honor and pleasure to work with Dr. Emanuel. I will now pass the screen on to her.
Oh, okay. Let me try one more time. It's great to be here with you, all of you today. Thank you for having me, and Helen, thank you for having me as well. And it's great to be here. It's sunny in New York today, so we're all feeling a little bit better. What we're going to do today is start off. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Child Mind Institute, and just so you know that there's no commercial support or conflict of interest. The Child Mind Institute is an independent nonprofit in New York that is dedicated to transforming children with mental health disorders and learning disorders, and also getting the word out there about the importance of treating them, about that these are common and treatable disorders that have solutions. So just a little bit about us, and we are a clinical practice, and you'll have that in the handout. So by all means, take a look at it, and if you have any questions, let me know. This is an outline of what we'll be doing today. There might be portions where I'm going to fly through because I've probably prepared way more information than I needed, which is what I do, but I want to make sure that you have as much information as possible on the topic. So we'll make sure we get to everything in the presentation. So I want to start off by talking about what is mindfulness. Let's just make sure we orient and get together on this. One of the most popular definitions, as you can see, is by John Kabat-Zinn, who I'll be talking about a little bit. Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So with that, we are going to do a mindfulness exercise together, which is a little interesting to do on a webinar and as we're all gathered all over the place, but I believe that this is going to work well. So I have actually even a bell with me that I'm going to ring, which you will hear, which looks pretty much like the one on the screen. So let's talk about what mindfulness is in the heart of it, if you will. So the foundation of all mindfulness practices is to bring awareness to your breath, okay? And what we want to do is practice that a little bit together today. I'm going to go through a very quick meditation. So what I would like you to do in your seats is to find a comfortable, relaxed position. If you would, if your feet are crossed, put them flat on the floor. Really be willing to do this exercise just for a few minutes. You could be seated in a chair. I'm guessing you're not going to be seated in a cushion on the floor because you're at the computer. And keep your back upright if possible. Don't slouch in the chair. Hands resting wherever they're comfortable, okay? All right, get yourself set. What you're going to do first is take a few deep breaths. Just try to breathe from your diaphragm, from your stomach. Take a deep breath like the doctor asks you to do in the office. All right, and what I'd like you to do now is just take a few more deep breaths. Okay, notice and relax your body. Try to notice the shape of your body, its weight. Let yourself relax and become curious about your body, seated here. The sensations it experiences, the touch, the connection with the floor to the chair. Relax any areas of tightness or tension. Just breathe. Tune into your breath. Feel the natural flow of breath in and out. You don't need to do anything to your breath. Not long, not short, just natural. Notice where you feel your breath in your body. It may be your abdomen. It may be in your chest or your throat or in your nostrils. See if you can feel the sensations of the breath, one breath at a time. When one breath ends, the next breath begins. Now, as you do this, you might just notice that your mind is starting to wander. You may start thinking about other things. If this happens, it's not a problem. It's very natural. Just notice that your mind has wandered. fact, you can say thinking or wandering in your head softly when you notice. And then gently redirect your attention right back to the breath. Stay here for just a few moments. Notice your breath in silence. From time to time, you'll get lost in thought and then return to your breath. After a few minutes, once again, notice your body, your whole body seated here. Let yourself relax even more deeply and just breathe. As we bring this meditation to an end, keeping your eyes closed for just a little while longer, take a moment to notice how you are feeling, your mind, your body, your spirit. If you like, offer gratitude for this time you've taken for yourself to be quiet, to breathe, and bring yourself into balance. So slowly come back into the room, aware of your body in the chair, and opening your eyes whenever you're ready. Okay, can't really see you guys, so I'm just guessing that you're coming out of the mindfulness exercise. What we normally do is we will ask people for non-judgmental observations of what they experienced. Because we can't do that right now, I'm happy to hear that later during the question section if you'd like to share. But for now, I'm going to move on to the rest of the webinar. But it is important to review this once you've done a mindfulness exercise. So I hope that helped to center you and get you ready for this next hour and get you ready for the spirit of what this practice is. So again, let's go on to what mindfulness is, okay? There's our definition that we came up with before. The other is a definition that I really like by a woman named Sharon Salzberg, who is very much in that community, has written many books on meditation, and they're very practical and easy to read. So she defines it as the quality allows us to be in the moment, connect to it fully without adding, holding on, pushing away, or going to sleep. So what I like to do in a presentation like this, but I wasn't sure I could do this in a webinar because I don't have the material copyrighted, is I want to direct your attention to a 60 Minutes interview that Anderson Cooper did with John Kabat-Zinn, who is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. And he talks about, again, what mindfulness really is. And he talks in this interview with Anderson, I really encourage you to check it out, how people are so overwhelmed by life. They're, in a sense, he says, not really living at all. So we're just preparing for the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. And then what is that for? So I really like the way that he describes how he lives with awareness. He gets up with awareness, he brushes his teeth with awareness, and he gets ready for the day with awareness. And he goes throughout his day with awareness. I also really like this metaphor that he talks about being in the shower. He said, and you'll see this in the video, he says, next time you're in the shower, check to see if you're actually in the shower. You may not be. And people, I think it was, the response was, that's a little strange. Anderson wasn't quite understanding that. And what he says is you may actually be in the shower, but really your mind is in your first appointment at work or your first meeting, or you may have a bunch of people in the shower with you. And so the idea behind mindfulness is really to just be with yourself in the shower, if you will, and be able to be there with full awareness instead of preparing for the next moment. And this is what we want to teach our clients. I'm going to move on to what mindfulness is in terms of a definition. So one of the things that's really important to know is that mindfulness and meditation are not actually interchangeable. You will see them interchanged, but they're actually different definitions, okay? And it's very important for us to define this. So meditation itself, it really is a way of transforming the mind, okay? Buddhist meditation practices are techniques that allow for the development of concentration, calm, and emotional positivity, and also clarity. Really, it's an important thing, and I'll talk about that more. With meditation, you essentially learn the patterns of the mind and how to cultivate new, more positive ways of being. And this can be very transformative for people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of meditation that you may have heard of. One is guided meditation, which in a sense we just did that. It's called guided imagery or visualization. And this is a method of meditation in which you form mental images or places of situations, especially ones that you potentially find relaxing, using the senses. Another is mantra meditation. Mantra meditation is a type of meditation where you silently repeat a word or thought or phrase to yourself. I like this little cartoon that we found that kind of describes what mantra meditation is, and how a meditator actually feels a lot of the time. So just to go back, one type of mantra meditation you may have heard of specifically is called transcendental meditation. And transcendental meditation is a type of practice in which people are able to get a script or a word or a mantra of some sort, and they are able to, they repeat this to themselves silently. It's their own personal assigned script. And so the idea is they practice it 20 minutes a day, sometimes in the morning and the evening, and it's just a specific type. Then there's the definition of mindfulness meditation, okay? So mindfulness, actually, it has a specific word in Buddhism. It's called vipassana, and it's learning to watch one's thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise and pass without being caught up in them. With this practice, you develop an increased awareness and acceptance of being in the present moment, and you broaden your conscious awareness. So it's actually, from a Buddhist perspective, mindfulness is actually an advanced practice. In traditional teaching, students first learn to stabilize their attention through samatha, or which is breath meditation, okay? That's the first step. Only when students learn to reliably quiet their minds, which can take years of practice, it's mindfulness or vipassana is introduced. So we actually do see this distinction in a difficulty level when working with patients. So for example, people often have difficulty becoming accustomed to simply focusing on the breath, let alone watching their thoughts go through the mind and without any attaching to them. So we really would like people, when they start mindfulness exercises, if at all possible, to start with these quiet internal breathing exercises. So they get that down. Now, we're advancing the practice from Buddhism. We're not putting in years of practice necessarily right off the bat. So let's remind ourselves of mindfulness's secular definition, okay? Paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. One thing I want to really emphasize is that mindfulness is not relaxation. While practicing mindfulness may induce some physiological changes, lowered heart, breathing rate, or metabolic rates, the practice of mindfulness is actually active, purposeful, and intentional. And it's not, the purpose is not to necessarily induce a state of awareness, relaxation, okay? So that's really important for us to understand, is that often our clients will be looking at us going, oh, this was great. I really relaxed, and so it's filled its purpose. That's not actually what we're talking about here. But it is a side benefits for sure. Okay, so one of the things I want to outline are the key components of mindfulness, the goals of mindfulness, if you will. So why do we practice? There are multiple reasons why we practice mindfulness, and it depends on the source. The original intent of these contemplative practices was deconstruction of the self, or understanding of the self. Obviously the Buddhists did not or come up with this, or other traditions did not come up with this to treat psychopathology. That was not the intent. So, but one of the things that people do find when they practice mindfulness is that the goal is actually freedom from suffering. That's a nice quote I found from two researchers, Germer and Siegel. So as mindfulness deepens, wisdom and compassion arise. So when you practice mindfulness, if you do practice, and I'm going to be emphasizing the idea of practice with this, because it's not something you can just do when you need to. It's kind of, I'll get into, it's like going to the gym in a sense. But the idea is, while you practice and you start to learn how to be in touch with yourself, your mind, your urges, your emotions, that you're able to actually see them in a different perspective and learn how to see them differently and accept them and change. And when you see it differently, you change and your suffering goes down. And that's one of the key points here. All right. So another thing that I really like is this article by Bishop in 2004, where they really tried to figure out what are the components of mindfulness, what makes it work. And the first component is self-regulation of attention that they identify. So it's the ability to be aware and attentive to one's thoughts, feelings, and body sensations in any given moment. If you think about it, that is the key of what we're trying to do here. So many, especially in this day and age, we are just constantly, where's my phone sitting here, constantly on our phones and not really keying into ourselves. And we want to teach people how to do that. The second component is curiosity, openness, and acceptance of one's experience in any given moment. So we're going to be talking about how this applies to our patients, particularly those with depression, and the idea of not making meaning of thoughts, actually detaching from these thoughts and being able to see them in a different way. That's one of the biggest things that we're looking at here. So these idea of detaching or decentering will be describing from one's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and promoting acceptance of one's experience in any given moment. We'll be talking about this. So we really can make sure you understand that clients do benefit from this. Okay. So again, why are we practicing mindfulness? Just a few things. Mindfulness allows you to be in control of your mind rather than letting your mind be in control of you. Really, that's one of the things we say in DBT often, that when you practice being able to control the monkey mind, which is what we call it a lot of the time, being able to control that mind that wanders and jumps all over the place and gives you agita and pain and anxiety. When you're able to actually get some mastery over it, it makes a huge difference. Mindfulness, also a huge component, is in mood regulation, being able to choose a behavior more thoughtfully after you actually centered yourself in your mood, rather than reacting impulsively to regulate that mood or emotion. Mindfulness can help you focus your attention. There is research that suggests this, which we'll be going through a little bit. It allows you to see reality a little bit more accurately, non-judgmentally, so that distance stance. Again, as we've talked about, can reduce emotional suffering and increase sense of well-being. Another component of mindfulness, which does not get talked about a lot in the Western application of mindfulness, if you will, is increased compassion for self and others. This is actually a tremendous component of mindfulness and meditation. And so when you start to be able to get in touch with yourself, you can actually start to be able to get in touch with the feeling of empathy for others, and not necessarily in that order. So just a huge piece that we should really highlight. Okay. I just want to focus for 1 second on how mindfulness is just exploded. I had this slide before, it actually had a little bomb on it, but I decided to replace it with this one. The idea is mindfulness, really, if you look in the literature, it's all over the place now, and there's lots of different kinds of mindfulness research being done, both in neurobiology, neuroscience, and clinical applications, in coming up with different treatments. It's really just remarkable how it's changed so much in 20 years. And it for sure has become a buzz phrase or word. And some people, as a result, are obviously dubious because it's just the latest phase or fad that people are thinking of. I think there's actually a real application for it that could be longstanding. It's a question of how do we harness it. So just you can see that, and this is in your packet, this is tons of different research on mindfulness and how it affects these different kinds of problems and disorders. For children as well, these are some examples of how it's been adapted. And also with mood and anxiety disorders, which we'll be getting into a little bit today. So just so you know, that's just a sampling of that big explosive chart right there. We don't have the time to get into these studies, but by all means, you can reference them yourselves. Just also another thing to note is mindfulness in the media. I have my own copy sitting over here of this Time magazine. It's really a great piece, and just getting a sense of what this construct and concept is about. And just some sampling of mindfulness in the media that you can see. So it's all over the place. People are really talking about it. When I do give presentations now, parents are very much, they've now heard of it and they get a sense of it. They're like, how do I incorporate this into my life? Or their question is, are you really asking me to do another thing put in my day, especially here in New York? So yes, we are actually asking you to put in another thing in your day, but it will benefit you greatly. So that is one thing that we wanted to highlight. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evidence-based treatments out there that incorporate mindfulness and give them a little bit of due. So one of the reasons why I want to do this is I want to highlight that these are treatments that if you have no experience in, or you have some experience in them, that they are available to get trained in. The training for them obviously is not a weekend or just a little bit of time. It's time and expense. And so, but they're unbelievably worthwhile. So if you have the opportunity to do that, I really encourage you to do so. At the same time, part of the purpose of this presentation is for when you don't have the ability to necessarily be able to always take the time to get the training in these treatments, how do you incorporate some of these techniques for your patients? But I do want to give you the foundation for some of them. All right, so I mentioned John Kabat-Zinn before. He is one of the leaders in bringing these mindfulness-based concepts to the West and being able to incorporate Eastern thought. And a lot of researchers and clinicians have taken his lead and also, as you see, developed tremendous work. So mindfulness-based stress reduction, that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. Mindfulness-based stress reduction was developed in the late 1970s with an emphasis on stress reduction and improving well-being. It's been applied widely across multiple issues, including physical, mental, and non-clinical populations. And it was originally developed to complement medical treatment, not as a substitute for medical treatment. It remains so to this day. It's a complement. Some people actually use it as a primary treatment, but in general, it's meant to complement and be adjunctive and collaborative with Western medicine. There, you needed that too. So the other thing is that a second goal is to expand so that there's training programs so it could be incorporated all over the country. I recently, actually, with the patient I'll be presenting, wanted him to enroll in a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And we looked around, and there's plenty out there, which is at least in this area, which is really good to hear. So I'm very happy to see that, and hopefully it's expanding more. Some of the main objectives of mindfulness-based stress reduction are to cultivate mindfulness through formal practices, which we'll be talking a little bit about. But these are some of the things that are done: yoga, body scans, sitting, standing, walking, and helping patients to assume a degree of responsibility for their own healing, and incorporating into daily activities. And stop is one of the little techniques that is in there. The time commitment is brief, actually. It's an 8-week course for 2 to 2.5 hours. You can do a retreat for a whole day, and it is a lot of practice each day. But that is how this works. It's practice, practice, practice. The instructors themselves, and I'm going to be really getting into the importance of doing these interventions and doing that, of having a practice yourself. It requires extensive personal practice and grounding in mindfulness. So the model is really to embody and live these practices in order to teach, not just model based on a couple of different experiences. It's quite important for the person to be living and breathing what they do. And then you just see that there's obviously, this is just a sampling of the research that's been done on mindfulness-based stress reduction. MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. One of the primary mindfulness adaptations for the treatment of depression. So it was originally, and continues to stay, to be a prevention intervention for adults diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It was developed in the 1990s, and It integrates elements of mindfulness-based stress reduction and cognitive therapy for depression. It has also been extended at this point to people with current diagnoses of depression and anxiety disorders. In this treatment, patients learn to process cognitions in a different way and through the mindfulness exercises. Thus, it serves to prevent reoccurrence of depression when a patient is presented with new challenging situations. The idea is really behind it is instead of getting caught up in the literal thoughts that so haunt depressed patients, the idea is for patients to learn to observe them non-judgmentally and thus understand the transient nature of these thoughts, as well as recognizing that the content is not actually reality. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. The main objectives, as I was saying, is training in mindfulness to increase awareness of moment-to-moment experiencing. And again, mentioning the idea of decentering. Patients are taught to view events in the mind rather than treating thoughts as accurate reflections of reality. And they learn to choose a skillful response to unwanted thoughts and feelings and sensations to decrease likelihood of relapse rather than an unskillful one. Time commitment is similar actually to MBSR 8-week course, 2 hours, homework in between sessions, doing mindfulness practices, and again requires the clinician to have their own mindfulness practice. One of the things I love about MBCT is that it's being adapted for treatment of adolescent depression. So these are moving into the adolescent realm, which is one of my areas. Again, research on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and it's all there. DBT, hard to summarize DBT in a slide or two, but basically a cognitive behavioral treatment originally developed to treat suicidal individuals suffering from borderline personality disorder. And it has also been adapted for now for adolescents and a number of other disorders. It really redefines borderline personality disorders as a dysfunction in the emotion regulation system. And one of the things that got me into mindfulness in the first place was to actually do DBT. So it blends behavior therapy and principles of Zen Buddhism. It depends on who's doing it, but around a 26-week manualized behavioral treatment that includes individual therapy, multifamily skills training groups, in an outpatient setting, and also includes phone coaching, as you probably know. It's grouped into 5 modules, mindfulness being, in my opinion, the most important one. So DBT and mindfulness in DBT, it plays a prominent role because the idea is it's a main component of the skills to teach and also a stance for the therapist, meaning so we want to teach our patients, again, that you have the ability to get a hold of your emotions instead of your emotions getting a hold of you. That by practicing mindfulness, you learn to sit back and actually watch your emotions rather than immediately react to them. And so patients over time learn how to actually take the pause and be able to, instead of impulsively act and do what's often can be destructive or impulsive things, to be able to sit back and watch the wave go by and without responding. So it essentially take hold of one's mind. And I just listed the mindfulness skills. It's unfortunately outside of the scope of this webinar to be able to go through them, but I encourage you to do so if you're not familiar with them. And finally, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Stephen Hayes built ACT from the bottom up. He developed a research program aimed at understanding the ways in which human language and cognition influences and maintains emotional suffering. Based on this research, he developed a general theoretical model of psychopathology that emphasized how language and cognition trap people, sounding familiar, into behaving in ways that increase or maintain their suffering. So one key implication of this research is experiential avoidance, or the avoidance of or escape from unwanted internal experiences, or these situations that related to them drives psychopathology. So mindfulness practice actually obviously occurs in ACT, but has different roots and plays somewhat different role than in DBT. For instance, there's no mention of Zen or contemplative prayer or other spiritual traditions in the genesis of mindfulness in ACT. In ACT, specific mindfulness strategies ultimately aim to increase clients' psychological flexibility. One of the strategies I really like in ACT is involving reducing the extent to which clients experience their thoughts and feelings as being equivalent to themselves as a whole. So for example, such strategies involve helping clients establish and get in contact with what's called the observing self. I like the chessboard metaphor in ACT, which is to demonstrate that a client is not his or her thoughts and feelings. So essentially the thoughts and feelings are the pieces on the chessboard, and rather that the client is the chessboard itself, in which these experiences occur. So the chessboard has the thoughts and feelings kind of floating all over it, but not necessarily the same thing. Really like that metaphor. Okay, let me see what time. I'm gonna move fast. Okay, so how is mindfulness measured? These are just some scales that are out there, and I really want to point out that overall, mindfulness is hard to be measured directly as we would like because it's not directly observable. It's a multifaceted construct, and it's not really easy to to define all aspects of mindfulness. But these scales are starting to do that. The MOS currently has the most support, but overall, there's a few out there that definitely people are using. So I just wanted to mention that. Again, we don't have a ton of time to get into it. I want to also just to talk about quickly the rationale for mindfulness interventions. So there is obviously, as we've been saying, increasing evidence for mindfulness as an intervention for mood and anxiety disorders. But we don't really fully and knowledgeably understand the mechanisms of change that may be responsible for these observed improvements in both the mental and physical well-being with mindfulness-based interventions. We don't really know why it works, essentially. But here's some proposed mechanisms of change that Holtzel et al. Proposed that they suggested to be able to say, why does this work? The first is attention regulation, which of course is stability of awareness in spite of competing input. Body awareness, noticing subtle sensations, being aware of one's emotions. Emotional regulation, decreased emotional reactivity and not letting emotions interfere with performance. Cognitive reappraisal, seeing difficulties as meaningful or benign rather than all bad. Exposure, you want to obviously global desensitization to whatever is present in the field of awareness. And finally, flexible sense of self, which is meaning like the again, that concept of disidentification with emotions and increasing adaptiveness, decreased rigidity of thinking, being able to see yourself in different ways and being able to see yourself as flexible rather than just one way. I'll get into that a little bit more. All right, so the rationale for mindfulness interventions. These are potential benefits. They have somewhat been studied. Not all of them have been well studied. Some of them are proposed. Again, a lot of this research is still in its infancy. But I'm just gonna, not to go through the whole list, but stress reduction, increased emotion regulation, cognitive flexibility, sleep quality, acceptance of distressing moments, increased empathy and compassion. These are all things, pardon me, that are very much seen as a potential benefit to mindfulness. But we don't have all the info clearly, and there's limitations to our knowledge. For example, how much mindfulness do you need? What's the dose-response relationship if you're thinking in that Western model? Is it 3 times a week? How many minutes do you do it? Researchers are suggesting that dosing may not be the way to go. So mindfulness-based treatment is essentially idiographic. So it depends on moment-to-moment fluctuations within the person or his or her life. So really, it's very hard to say what is working here and also what is needed. I like to think of it as the more you can do, the better, but it's quantity and it's also quality. So if you're sitting there for 20 minutes and you're really thinking about 20 other things and you're not really focusing on your breath and you're checking your phone maybe a little bit, that may be a lot of time, but it's not quality. Whereas if you do 5 minutes of quality breathing, where you're really focused in on that moment, I'd say that actually is probably more productive. But we just don't know how much is needed. We also don't know what the correlation between is therapists having their own practice and a client having their own practice. Okay, so mindfulness interventions for depression, why are we thinking about this? First of all, we want to cultivate healthier habits of mind. For depressed patients, we want to cultivate their ability to become more aware of their thoughts, feelings, and urges. It is very much within the realm of a depressed patient that they are seeing these negative thoughts and feelings as being very much about themselves and attributing it globally and stably. And we want to teach them that there's actually another way to see it. So we want to build the ability to question negative thinking and develop meta-awareness. The ability to see yourself outside of yourself. We want them to get a sense of the patterns of ruminative thought. And for many patients that I see with more difficult presentations of depression, particularly when I see adolescents or young adults with this, a lot of them really actually haven't been able to get a sense of what they're thinking. And they sit in therapy and they're like, I don't know what I'm thinking. They can't turn their mind off. So it's very hard to do cognitive behavioral therapy when the person doesn't know what their thoughts are. And so mindfulness allows for CBT to actually work, for you to be able to get into what the thoughts are. It also allows mindfulness to be able to be the person to be fully present in their experience, and not just in a negative way, but in a positive experience. So we relate that later to behavioral activation. And of course, a lot of avoiding goes on in depression. We want to decrease their avoidance from distractions. All right. It's very hard to summarize how to do mindfulness in such a short period of time, but just to be creative and use the internet. So I've already just demonstrated to you breathing, but truly you can do anything mindfully. Mindful eating, listening to music, yoga, drawing, mindful walking, being full awareness, relaxation exercises. With children and adolescents, you can do bubbles, you can do fun things. Actually, adults like those too. But the idea is to teach them to be present in the moment fully, and again, non-judgmentally. So I'm going to move on just because there's much more to go through, and to make sure that these are some examples of what you can do. How do you integrate mindfulness into the treatment of depression? So partly, the first thing that happens is it's very important for you to model through the therapeutic relationship, okay? It is very important to be open to participating yourself, being able to have fun with it, have your own practice with it, because that will help tremendously. You want to orient the patient to mindfulness. You want to teach them that mindfulness is a new way to respond to emotions. It gives us some clarity of our thoughts, clarity of emotions, and it helps to decrease what we call monkey mind, where our mind jumps all over the place and we just try to follow it, and it takes control over us. And you want to integrate it as you're orienting to CBT and behavioral activation for depressed patients. You want to provide psychoed, what it is, and you want to be able to make sure that it's something that becomes more familiar and becomes more integrating with practice. And you want to repeat the orientation of mindfulness and what it is, because it's such an abstract concept that people don't get it in one shot. Frankly, when I was learning it in the context of DBT, I really think there was a moment like 2 years into doing DBT where I was like, oh my God, I get this so much better now. Like I actually understand it. And that was 2 years of doing pretty full-time DBT. Not quite full-time, but a lot of it. So the idea also is you want to integrate mindfulness exercises into each session. You have to decide if you want to do it in the beginning, the middle, the end. I like starting off the beginning as we did, to get into the room and being able to focus. You want to tailor the exercises to the individual. You want to find the right fit. You want to begin with easy ones so they feel like they can get it. And some people are going to want to do those more active ones, and some of the people are going to really like the breathing ones. Start with breathing and see how it goes, is what I like to say. You also want to do brief after each session. And the next piece is you're going to want to connect these exercises to your behavioral activation protocols. You really can bring in mindfulness and have that be a part of the behavioral activation plan, so that they're practicing throughout the day and they're practicing in different kinds of ways. You use mindfulness, of course, to elicit the negative thoughts and feelings that we were talking about. And you want to also have your clients start to, as they get more familiar, come up with their own ideas for mindfulness. I've had people come in and say, I did this mindfulness exercise last week. I have to tell you about it. And these are people that were not having much energy to begin with. And it really invigorated them. You want to assign it for practice as you would any CBT homework. And you have to determine the frequency and type in advance. You may want to do a mindfulness record so they can keep track. With children, you want to very much have them be a part of it, have their parents be a part of it. have the family really practice together. Okay, when to integrate mindfulness into the treatment of depression. Different reasons. To enhance the therapeutic relationship, I can't tell you how much it really increases the comfort level and brings an ease, because you're doing something with them. You're showing your human side, and you're showing that you do this too. And they see that, and it brings a collaboration about that I think is very valuable. Again, you want to incorporate it into behavioral activation. There's this aspect of mindfulness called full participation or participation, and it's that kind of experience where you're in a movie or you're a concert or you're dancing and you forget about what's going on with the rest of the world or your life. It's really just fully being in the moment. And to have a depressed patient be able to do that in a positive way is a very valuable experience. You want to integrate mindfulness when a patient can't attend to identify their thoughts, as I was talking about, or they can't really get a grasp on their ruminative patterns, and you're not really getting it either because they can't state it. They can't tend to or label emotions. You can use mindfulness to shape self-care. For example, having them practice mindfully brushing their teeth when maybe they haven't been doing so because they've been so depressed. That can actually work as well. And you can also use mindfulness to decrease treatment-resistant or interfering behaviors. Those clients that just don't want to start with CBT or don't want to do CBT and they think it's BS, which I have had. So that's one way to get them moving. Barriers, it's abstract, requires ongoing teaching and repetition. It requires clinician firsthand knowledge and ongoing regular practice. You have to put the work in too. There's no immediate benefit. It's not our world where we get the immediate, like, there's the change right there, and changes can be very subtle. You may need to try different kinds of exercises. Some people think of it as religious or new age, and you have to dispel those concepts. It's another lifestyle change, and it is like going to the gym in a way where people practice and they need to practice, or learning to play the piano. It requires ongoing work. I'm going to give you a quick example of how I've incorporated this in. This is Jordan. He is a 18-year-old Caucasian male, and his name has been changed. He left college first semester due to increased dysfunction. He really actually developed pretty severe major depression, and he was put on an SSRI, and it was titrated up too quickly, and he developed serotonin syndrome, and he was really sick. So he had to come home from college. We diagnosed him with MDD. He actually had GAD as well that had not been diagnosed, and he had actually had he had an eating disorder, probably anorexia, not quite meeting full criteria, but definitely close, about 2 years ago. He definitely is from a high achieving family. He's the youngest of 3 kids, and he had previous treatment, and the family is very, very concerned about the stigma of mental illness. So just a little bit of the measurements: BDI, BAI, Beck depression, Beck anxiety, and we initiated CBT treatment alongside the slow reintroduction of the SSRI. We saw him in our intensive program, multiple sessions a week, and incorporated all the aspects of depression treatments: behavioral activation, mood monitoring, CBT, and we quickly tried to incorporate mindfulness because he just could not get a handle on what his thinking was at all. He really could not connect to it all. He couldn't sit still. He just felt terrible, but couldn't really identify what those thoughts were. So we did breathing exercises at the beginning of each session. He engaged in regular practice at home. He was one of those patients that actually does the work. And when I say he chose not to use the apps, I'm just going to mention briefly in a minute the apps available. And he was assigned to do a daily check-in, and I had to address some of the barriers to practicing regularly, but he's able to do it. And basically, overall, it allowed him to really learn to observe and describe thoughts. And he was able to start to see the negative thought patterns. It truly was one of those awakening things. It came probably within a month and a half. And one might make the argument, well, isn't that the SSRI? It really isn't, because he really was able to tell me how he practiced day in and day out, and the different ways that he was learning each day to see himself in a way he had never seen before. I mean, the SSRI may have contributed a little bit, but I really think it was the mindfulness that actually opened up his emotions and his mind. He was also able to sit more still and feel negative emotions, which he wasn't able to do them. And also he decreased his people pleasing by actually being able to start talking about what his negative emotions were. Okay, that was the quickest case presentation I've ever made. Just to finish up, I just want to mention cultivating your own mindfulness practice. You must do, if you're going to use mindfulness-based interventions, you must do this yourself. There's simply no other way, as John Kabat-Zinn says. You could do a training or a retreat, you could do formal or informal. There's lots of online meditations, there's books, there's plenty of resources out there to be able to learn how to do this. Here's some steps. This is courtesy of Garrison Institute in Garrison, New York, just so you'll have that. And whoops. And then just a sampling of mindfulness-based apps online, and a little bit of a few apps for depression. Some online resources for you that on mindfulness that you can use, as well as books that you may want to start with. There's plenty of them out there. And Helen, I think we are at the point where we can take questions. So I really thank you for all of your time and attention to this very important topic. And that was very quick to go through, but let me know if you have any specific questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emanuel, for your excellent presentation and the mindfulness exercise. We're now going to start to answer some of these questions. Here's the first question. You just mentioned the case of Jordan, who saw the benefits to mindfulness in about 1 month and a half. In general, how quickly can one experience the benefits of doing quite a rigorous practice of mindfulness?
That's a really great question. That's one of the things we really don't know. It's so dependent on the person. I have had, if you put in daily practice, I have had people report to me that they start to see subtle changes in themselves within a few weeks. And I've had other people say 2 months in, I don't know what this is doing for me. And then again, also getting people to practice every day is hard. I think part of it is learning to, people, again, you're not going to get the bam, my life changed effect. People really, you have to actually teach your clients how to recognize subtle changes. And that may be through you questioning, anything changed this week? Any kind of new things occur? Anything happen? So it's also a collaboration in being able to ask the questions that might elicit, oh, wait, you know what? That is different. And it may be a different outcome than what you expected it to be. So it may not be immediately, for example, a decrease in the BDI or the scores. It might be, you know what? I'm sleeping better this week. Or I didn't wake up in the middle of the night, or my appetite's a little better. And sure, that can be from a number of things. That can be from treatment, that can be from an SSRI, that can be from anything. But you want to start to come up with a pattern or a group of changes, and also, oh, you know what? I thought about this differently. That's how you want to teach them to notice these things.
Thank you very much. You were discussing a little bit the characteristics of doing mindfulness. Now, if one is a ruminative depressive, how can one avoid mindful exercise turning into an opportunity for rumination? How can you keep that mind focused?
Yes. Believe me, that can happen. I start them doing 30 seconds or a minute. I have them do it tiny little chunks at a time. So there's no opportunity or very little opportunity for those patterns to start setting in right there. Because I've had people do a minute and be like, yep, I started thinking about that particular negative pattern. And I'll even shorten it a little bit more. So they just get the experience of having the breath right there. And then I build from there. And as they're building their mindfulness muscle, and we do it together, and they start to, the ruminative thought patterns come in, that's where we have the conversation of, okay, is this about you? Is this not about you? And then you bring in your CBT and you challenge it. And you see if they can start to get a sense of how it's outside of their awareness. And then also, as they continue to practice it, they will start to see that they are different from the thoughts. So I do it slowly and carefully.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emanuel. This is very helpful. We still have 2 questions. You were talking about parents asking them to do another thing in the day, and we understand that in your practice you're also working with children. What is your experience working with children and parents and having them apply mindfulness? How successful is this? How difficult is it? What is your experience?
You know, with younger children, I've actually used it more. You know, we don't see as many kids below middle school with depression, although there are some, but we usually are doing more of a DBT-based intervention. So with a lot of the younger ones that I see, I'm actually doing it for my anxiety. And I find that the children are actually much more receptive to doing it than the parents are. And I start with the kids and I teach the kids how to do the basic mindfulness exercises. And then I have a family session where I bring in the parents and have the kid lead the way and they all do it together. And I teach the parents as well so that they get the sense that the children are able to do it. How do I incorporate it in with older kids? I definitely, in the same way, teach them the mindfulness exercises, particularly with depression. I'll do it in the same way I've been describing. I incorporate parents into my treatment so much that they are learning and understanding what their kids are learning too. So the parents get taught that this is an important part of your child's recovery and that this can actually benefit you as well. And because usually parents are not, it's not the typical obvious situation where parents are doing just fine and the kids not doing fine, because parents suffer when their kids are suffering. So I teach the parents that there's a benefit not only to your child, but to you. And so they learn it as well. I hope I answered that question fully.
Yes, thank you very much. Very helpful. Really a family perspective on mindfulness. Our last question, for our clinicians, what are some tips you could give about setting up a mindfulness practice? You shared some apps, some books, and some training. So what would be some tips to get started on mindfulness, integrating mindfulness into the practice?
Yeah, I love answering this question because I want everybody to do this. I very much would start. I think one of the easiest ways to start is by using one of the apps. I'm not endorsing any particular one, but I've had a lot of people start with Headspace, just because it's 10 sessions to start and get a sense of it. If you're in a more major metropolitan area or a place that has a meditation center, I would encourage you to take a class or get an introduction in some kind of way. In addition, you may want to find other colleagues that do this kind of practice and join together and have a breathing session or a meditation session together. We're starting to try and incorporate such a thing here at the Child Mind Institute. But just start by breathing a couple of minutes a day and get a sense of what this is and get into it. People are often like, I'm doing it wrong, or I'm not sure how to do this. Just start doing it and you'll get an understanding of what it's about. That's how I would do it. But also the other thing you can do is you can go take a walk and say, I'm going to focus only on what I see, or I'm going to focus on the sounds, or I'm going to go in the park and spot all the animals that I can see and try to pay full attention to animals. Like, there's so many different ways to just start being mindful. Bring awareness to a moment. Take 5 minutes a day and bring awareness to yourself and give yourself a few minutes to just be with yourself. That can start the practice too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emmanuel, and thank you very much to our participants of today. You will receive a follow-up email within 48 hours that includes a link to the evaluation and a link to the recording of the webinar. Please do share your thoughts, even if you're not requesting CE. We would also like to share that the CE code for this professional webinar is SDOL. That is S as in Sam, D as in Danny, O as in O and L. If you're not yet an ADAA member, please consider becoming one. ADAA offers an excellent members benefits package such as year-long access to continuing education, free access to special interest groups including peer online consultation groups, significant discount to ADA's annual 4-day conference, promotion of your practice in ADA's online Find a Therapist database, and much more. We hope you will join us at the Anxiety and Depression Conference coming soon, April 5th to 8th, 2018 in Washington, D.C. And on behalf of ADAA and our partner Child Mile Institute in New York and our presenter, thank you so much for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.